Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Our first story about a contractor whose work was not appreciated. Let's see how it turned out. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. And our first story. Don't act like you're doing us any favors. You got it, buddy. Preface: I'm a contractor, and I replace various dispensers in different types of buildings. No matter what the job is, I do not discard the old equipment that I take out without a $1 unit charge because I have to take them to the dump, separate the materials, break down the cardboard, etc. So with every job, I ask the site lead if they want me to discard it at that cost or if they want to take care of it themselves. If they do not pay, that equipment has nothing to do with me as soon as it's off the wall. My only responsibility is to remove it, and it's their property to dispose of. Now, the care home I'm working in refused to pay the fee, but still asked me to separate and break down the cardboard. I'm nice, so I was doing that. I also organized some of the old equipment onto a pallet and shrink-wrapped it to be easier for them to dispose of. So today, my truck is parked in the back, where they specifically told me to park it. The pallet of old equipment is in the garbage disposal area, where they specifically told me to put it, and the rest of the equipment is in a pile behind the pallet, where they specifically told me to put it. Someone in maintenance comes and asks me to move my truck because they need access to a certain dumpster from that side. Okay, I stop working, come outside, move to the other side of the alley area. I find the maintenance lead and ask if it's okay to park there for about 20 minutes, as I'm headed to lunch soon anyway. She says that's perfect. Cool. I head back inside when a man in maintenance, who heard that conversation, stops me and says the pallet is in the way of a garbage can they need. I say I'm sorry, but that has nothing to do with me. It's not my equipment, and I just have to put it where I'm told. He keeps insisting it needs to be moved. I'm a 110-pound woman with no super strength skills, to my knowledge, or pallet jack, so I'm not sure how he expects me to move a 600-pound pallet, and I tell him as much. And again, remind him that it's not my equipment, and it's just been placed where I was instructed to place it after going out of my way to organize it for them. He says, "Don't act like you're doing us any favors," which sounds good to me. No more favors. You got it, bro. So I go back in to finish my last bit of work, then come out to grab lunch 15 minutes later. And the pallet has been moved directly behind my truck, blocking me in. Everyone involved knew that was my truck and knew I was headed to lunch soon. If they think I'm going to come ask them to move it, they're underestimating my ability to match their pettiness, especially after I was told not to do any more favors. I got in my truck and backed into the pallet until it tipped over into the mountain of discarded equipment that I hadn't palletized, and went to lunch. Came back from lunch with a newfound freedom from giving a crap about whether the old equipment was the least bit organized. Before, I was neatly stacking them to the best of my ability. Now, I don't effing care, bro. I'm tossing crap wherever is easiest for me, because apparently it's just as inconvenient for them when I organize it. And our second story. Renege once the job's done? Prepare for your just desserts. A few years after I started my business, I was asked to clean up and optimize a number of PCs in multiple locations, as well as set up some forms and templates for a new client who owned a local restaurant. The work, all labor apart from a little travel, was performed over the space of a month due to scheduling conflicts and school holidays. But on completing the last of it, the client confirmed verbally that he was happy with all I'd done, and to go ahead and send an invoice. I duly emailed an invoice for a sum just in excess of £400. I waited for payment, never heard anything. Sent reminder emails, called and left messages, but no response. Eventually, a couple of busy months had passed, and I met the client by chance in the local supermarket. On asking why he'd not paid or been in touch, he said that all the PCs were as bad as they had been before I started, and that he'd tried to contact me with no success. As my landline and mobile phone had caller display as well as answering services, and there'd been no emails, I knew the latter was BS, and as any PC user knows, a system can easily go back to pot if the user bad habits don't change. So I contacted a local debt collector, gave him the details, printouts of my call logs, and post-invoicing emails, and he took them to the restaurant. On his return, his words were, "He's not disputing the invoice, he's saying that the work wasn't done right. So it's his word against yours." I queried if it was worth taking the guy to small claims, to which the debt collector said, even if you could prove he confirmed he was satisfied with the work, they might insist you get his computers back to their pre-invoice state again. Do you really want to spend more time doing that? Of course, the answer was no, so I stewed it over in my mind and came up with a plan. At this point, it was late November, so creating 2 throwaway email accounts in female names, I got in touch with the restaurants to book a large party for Valentine's night the following February. I put it down as my husband's surprise 40th birthday party, confirmed that my husband's sister, and CC'd her in the message with the other throwaway, couldn't make the journey north, but would happily pay the £10 a head deposit as her share towards the night. Of course, as time went on, the ideas grew arms and legs. The numbers attending increased until the owner suggested he'd reserved the whole restaurant for the evening and they'd happily arrange the seating to suit us. But could I ensure the deposit was sorted ASAP, please? Of course, I confirmed that the sister was scatterbrained and that I'd ensure the check was with him very soon. He emailed the sister using the CC address and she confirmed it had been posted. To keep him on side, I asked for a proposed menu in advance so that I could send it to all the attendees for pre-ordering. Naturally, they were delighted that they know this makes their life much easier. Consequently, the numbers for all 3 courses were emailed in, with a few fussy eater variables thrown in for good measure. Needless to say, by the beginning of February, he was getting quite antsy about there being no sign of the deposit. But I reassured him that the sister's check must have been lost in the post, so she'd send another by special delivery if they could ensure someone was there to sign for it. I knew the owner lived about 25 miles away, and the restaurant didn't open until 5 p.m., so he'd have to come in very early and hang around waiting for it. A week before D-Day, and he'd obviously had enough. He emailed in a spat saying they'd turned away numerous inquiries, had no deposit, and could no longer hold back on taking other bookings. This time, I didn't bother replying. My part was done. My wife, at the time, and I were booked at another restaurant close by for our own Valentine's meal, after which we took a walk past the restaurant's business premises to see just 2 cars in their parking lot, one of which was his. I'm not sure how much he must have lost out on that night, but knowing his prices, I bet it was significantly more than the £400 I'd invoiced him. Of course, lessons were learned by me too. Get written or emailed confirmation of job satisfaction for one, and not letting new clients go unbilled for too long was another. Naturally, I had no hesitation letting all and sundry know how he'd behaved either, so he was blacklisted or forced to pay up front for any work by IT and other professionals I knew locally. And our last story. You want me to F off? I guess the lab just wasted $4,000. This one happened during my first career, when I worked as a scientist in a diagnostic lab. I'd been working for about 2 years at this point and had just been promoted to senior scientist. I had 2 supervisors in my section, each assigned to oversee half of the tests being done in our small corner of the lab, Rory and Tanya. Tanya was the most senior, most supervisor of the 2, and secondary to my department head, she had the most authority over me on any given day. She also hated me. Never did figure out why, but she hated about 3/4 of the people working in the lab, so I never took it personally. I just don't think she liked people. The lab tends to attract people like that, funnily enough. We always used to joke about being the reject stuffed into a hole at the bottom of a hospital to be kept away from the general public. As for Rory, it's important to note that he had a very good reputation in the lab of never lying. He was never once caught in even a half-truth, and he'd been working there for over 30 years. He was well-liked and well-trusted. This will be important later. One day, I was doing one of the more technically challenging tests that our department performs. It's long, fiddly, expensive, and easy to screw up. Only senior scientists are allowed to do it unsupervised, and this was maybe the second time I've done it alone. We're talking 2 days just to get it set up. It was a nightmare. While I was measuring out some gelatin powder into a beaker, I accidentally elbowed Tanya. Our workstations were right on top of each other. This happened at least 4 to 5 times a day with everyone. I apologized and go back to what I was doing, but she flips out, like full-on rage, screaming in my face kind of angry. After a couple of minutes of her tirade, she says, "Just F off, OP. No one wants you here." And then she storms off to her office to cool off. Rory comes up to me, having seen and heard the whole thing, and asks if I'm all right. I say I'm a little shaken, but nothing too bad, and get ready to continue my work. But Rory had heard the whole thing, and he saw what test I was doing. He whispers to me, "Your supervisor told you to go. Best you do what she says, and if she causes a fuss about it, be sure to tell the boss exactly what she said to you." Now, I knew Rory's reputation, so I knew I'd be safe. I also knew that being told to leave early by a supervisor meant that I was still paid out for the rest of the day, provided I'd worked at least 4 hours on my shift. The lab was actually pretty generous with time off, even if the pay and working conditions were crap. So I did exactly what Tanya had said. I effed off home. Now, at the stage I was at with that particular test, I'd spent about $4,000 worth of reagents. Normally, batches of 20 samples are run to try and keep the cost down, but it was still an expensive test when you include the nearly 3 days of work from a single scientist. This was one of Tanya's tests, and therefore, Rory was not required to ensure it was done. No one in my section was very happy with Tanya, and she had gone off to her office so she couldn't see me leave, so no one went to tell her that the test was left unsupervised. Apparently, she didn't come back for over an hour, and by then the test was ruined and had to be started over again. My boss was PO'd. Tanya, of course, tried to throw me under the bus, saying I'd left without informing anyone and that it was all my fault. But good old trustworthy Rory told the boss exactly what Tanya had said. I love Rory. I couldn't be punished for doing exactly what my supervisor had told me to do, so I got away with it completely. Unfortunately, nothing overly terrible happened to Tanya. She got formally reprimanded and had to take an anger management class that the hospital runs, but otherwise she got no real punishment. She never yelled at me again and was always careful to word things just right around me after that, so that was something. As for what I did on my half-day off, I went to the beach to enjoy the sunshine I almost never got to see working in that deep, dark dungeon that is the average hospital lab. I made sure to bring in the pictures the next day. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.